On Australia's Harmony Day, Parliament was anything but.
Why on today of all days has the Prime Minister chosen to weaken protections against racist hate speech?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank the honourable member for his question, and today we are strengthening the Racial Discrimination Act. We are strengthening it because we are making it clear, and we are standing up for freedom of speech.
Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull is talking about proposed changes to Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. In Australia, it's illegal to commit an act which is reasonably likely, in all circumstances, to offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate another person or group of people. The government wants to change that to harass or intimidate. The benchmark to be applied to any complaints about racial vilification would be the standard of a reasonable member of the Australian community. But many Australians fear the changes could lead to more race hate. And they took to social media to share their experiences.
At the age of 10, I was at a local pool as a group of white boys held my head underwater, laughing at me for being Asian.
I've been called a gook, nip, ching chong, or any number of racist names thousands of times.
When I was 6 years old, a white boy told me to go back to where I come from. I'm Aboriginal, not very bright, these racists.
Recently being told that I smell surprisingly good, for someone of my background.
Last month, coming out of local shops had trifecta. N-word, go back monkey. Bystanders were more shocked.
We've made progress in combating racism, but it's vital that we maintain our efforts. We must continue to have laws in Australia that set a standard on racial discrimination.
The government says the changes would strike a balance between protecting people and enabling free speech. But could they end up providing tacit approval for racism instead? Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Sydney is lawyer Mariam Veisadeh. She was granted asylum in Australia as a refugee and now advocates against racism. Mariam, good to talk to you. Let me begin by quoting your Prime Minister to you, Mr. Turnbull. He says, quote, "We are strengthening the race hate laws. They are clearer and they clearly express the type of conduct that should be prohibited, not mere slights or the taking of offence or hurt feelings." Doesn't that sound reasonable to you?
It does sound reasonable, but I would expect that our Prime Minister would actually be aware of the detail around this. And of course, the detail is that the federal court, so realistically in terms of how this law is actually interpreted, the federal court doesn't take the approach that it's just mere slights. In fact, they've specifically quoted that that's not the approach because, of course, arguably that would mean anybody could bring action against under these provisions. There is a reasonable test approach that has been applied by the federal court in terms of how they interpret Section 18C. And I think the most confusing factor has been that our layperson's interpretation of what Section 18C means is not the legal interpretation of Section 18C. The average person seems to apply a dictionary definition to what offence seems to mean. However, Section 18C, as it's interpreted by the courts and how it's actually played out in the courts, is very different in that the interpretation they're taking, there is actually a higher threshold. And, the exact wording is profound, and it's got to have a profound and serious effect. So in actual reality and in actual application, what the Prime Minister is suggesting and is indicating is not actually how it's panned out in the courts.
Now, they've kept the word harassed in there. So it seems as if what they're trying to say is, okay, if somebody is being blatantly racist and harassing you, they're still going to get in trouble. However, they're sharpening up the language to ensure that there aren't frivolous claims and false claims, because false claims have been used as weapons against other people. Call somebody a racist, mess up their career or life or whatever without evidence. Don't you want to kind of cut them some slack a little bit here to see that they're trying to sharpen up the language to ensure that they can achieve both?
Look, I can understand the intention. However, the term harass, and again, they haven't given us too much clarity, but the term harass has a repetitive nature to it. So only certain types of conduct would be covered under that. That's part of the issue. The other thing is, if you're looking to tighten the language, then why would you not perhaps change it to vilify or degrade, or words that I think would be, much more relevant in this context. And as for this being a case where someone could easily be offended and then bring action and cause all sorts of issues, the reality is that there's processes in place which can actually help avoid that happening. Now, one of the most cited cases in this regard, and those who sort of are preaching that Section 18C should be repealed, keep referencing this Queensland University of Technology case. And of course, the recommendations that have been made by the government, so not everything that the government's proposed, on Harmony Day are things that I entirely disagree with. One of the proposals was actually making procedural changes at the Australian Human Rights Commission to ensure that they actually have the power to reject frivolous claims right from the outset, early on in the process, instead of letting it drag on. So I suspect that that would actually help resolve some of the procedural issues. And it's really, really important that when we're looking at the language, we have to look at how it's actually applied in the court.
I want to step out of the courts for a second and go online. That freedom of speech hashtag. So as part of the pushback, people were tweeting their experiences of racism, of insult, of harassment. Many, as they were sort of growing up, a lot of, minorities particularly. Tell me, how much of that is just people coming across jerks in Australia, and how much of that is representative of daily experiences for minorities in Australia?
I think the ultimate test is, like you said, to look at the lived experiences of minority groups living in Australia and what they have to say. It has been said many, many times before that in Australia we have, high levels of low-level racism. So, I those who try and suggest that we don't have racism and everything's all harmonious all the time is incorrect. I think the lived experiences of those who do come from minority groups suggest otherwise.
Okay, got it. Mariam, thanks for joining us.